people talk about Jesus, and you'll hear such different accounts of him. You might well wonder if we could possibly all be talking about the same person. By some accounts, Jesus is a table-flipping, rule-breaking religious rebel. By others, he's a family values hardliner who promises stern punishment to anyone who steps out of line. If we're honest, even the stories in the Bible sometimes seem to present a bit of a mixed picture. We've seen Jesus break Sabbath customs with almost gleeful defiance. We've seen him get up in the faces of religious types who think they're too good to rub shoulders with sinners. But Jesus has also explicitly said that he believes in crossing every single T in God's commandments. And on at least some issues, like oath-taking or divorce, his positions are more restrictive than most teachers of his day. So how do all these apparent contradictions fit together in one person? Or, to state the question as most of us would actually like to ask it, is Jesus a liberal or is he a conservative? The Pharisees, who often serve as foils to Jesus in the Gospels, are extreme athletes of the soul. They can bench press 500 divine commands while most people are struggling with 50. They're widely admired by their neighbors for their ability to keep every one of the holy book's laws flawlessly. But Jesus has noticed a problem with reducing faith and relationship with God to a set of rules to keep. Actually, it's more like a series of problems. One problem is that rules tend to multiply like invasive species. Rule-loving humans keep creating more of them, until you end up with laws in the books like the one in Gainesville, Georgia, that makes it illegal to use a knife and fork to eat fried chicken. Another problem is legalism, which turns normal people into monsters who measure their neighbor's lawn with a ruler and call the HOA when it's a millimeter too long. But the biggest problem with relating to God primarily through rules is what this kind of faith allows. Laws lend themselves to loopholes. Just ask any tax advisor. There's the letter of the law, and then there's what the law leaves out. If it isn't legally outlawed, that means it's in bounds. The Pharisees are a case study in this third kind of problem. There's a commandment that says 10% of what a person earns belongs to God. They develop detailed procedures to make sure God gets every pre-tax penny. But what the law doesn't specify, thankfully, is what you're allowed to do with the rest of it. How much of it you can keep. What lengths you can go to acquire even more. Which means that a Pharisee can putter around their mansion in a silk bathrobe while an old man freezes outside in the alley and not feel a whiff of guilt about it, because hey, God got God's portion. There's also a scriptural law that allows for divorce, where wives have been found to be indecent. That delightful legal ambiguity leaves the Pharisees free to grant all kinds of dispensations to men like themselves who want to divorce their wives for indecencies like wrinkles or flat soufflés. If that leaves their ex-wife on the street begging for bread, there's no commandment against it. This is why, in Luke 16, Jesus goes in a sentence from talking about money to talking about marriage. What he's actually talking about is religion, and why following rules is an inadequate measure of faith. He's not saying, God's commandments don't matter, go ahead and break them at your leisure. He's saying, the letter of the law isn't nearly enough for what God is actually asking. Let's talk money, he says. You all pride yourselves on giving 10%. Don't stop. But know that God is just as invested in where the other 90% goes. There might not be a rule specifying how much money is too much, but that doesn't mean your relationship with money won't make or break your relationship with God. Or if you don't want to talk money, Jesus says, let's talk marriage. You all have found every legal loophole for disposing of inconvenient wives, but God isn't interested in playing word games with lawyers. Did you do everything you could to love your closest neighbor, your spouse, as much as you love yourself? Or didn't you? This is how Jesus' apparent contradictions come together. He's not lowering the bar beneath the letter of the law. He's raising the bar far above it. The rules aren't irrelevant. They're inadequate to the greater project of a fully God-centered, others-serving life. This isn't conservative law and order living. It also isn't liberal liberation from the tyranny of outdated morality. It's something else entirely. Jesus is teaching a total orientation toward God and God's mission of global restoration that affects every word, every relationship, every dollar, every choice, every moment of our lives. In this relationship that is faith, everything matters. Everything counts. Anyone who spends their life asking, what do the rules allow, has missed the point. That's the kind of hollow religion Jesus is critiquing. The better question, The only question, as I once heard someone put it, is what does love require? The greatest commandment is love because that's the actual standard. In the end, the only way to keep the commands, truly, is to go far above them. Let's read what Jesus says in Luke 16, beginning in verse 10. If you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be entrusted with things of your own? No one can serve two masters, for you'll hate the one and love the other. You'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. The Pharisees, who dearly loved their money, heard all this and scoffed at him. Then he said to them, "You like to appear religious in public, but God knows your heart. What this world honors is detestable in the eyes of God. Until John the Baptist, the law of Moses and the message of the prophets were your guides, but now the good news of the kingdom of God is preached, and everyone is eager to get in. But that doesn't mean that the law has lost its force. It's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the smallest point of God's law to be overturned. For example, a man who divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery, and anyone who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery." I'm Megan Larissa Good, and this has been Reading Jesus. Thanks so much for joining me for a few minutes in Luke, and I'll see you next time.